Congratulations to both sides, and congratulations to getting to the semifinals of the first annual LBS Invitational. The decision is a 2-1 for the negative from Liberty. So.
I sat, and I have a feeling it's probably the fiat arguments that won you this debate. I'll just go argument by argument. Soft power, I thought that even though your articulation of you have a lot of cards, they don't have a lot of cards, that one card, they provided explanation of what actually happens. They made some empirical references. Your argumentation was, we have a lot of cards.
Okay.
At this level of novice debating, you have to be explaining your arguments because that's what wins these. That's what wins these debates. So, in terms of that, the soft power argument went in their direction. Okay. Furthermore, you didn't get to the neolib or the prisons arguments within enough time in terms of what I was, what you needed to do. Yeah. So they had this neoliberalism advantage, and they had this racism advantage as well. So those are three things that are going their way. Okay. In terms of the security debate, at the end of the debate, the 2NR doesn't do very good impact analysis and doesn't do very good link analysis. You kind of just make those as assumptions, and you go for this alternative argument, and then you answer a couple of permutations, but you miss one of them, which is completely fine given that they weren't even really permutations. They're just like posed hypotheticals of what a permutation would look like, which were kind of acted as permutations. But that's not what I ultimately ended up voting on. I just thought that the case outweighed the alternative, and there really wasn't much of a articulation of how you lead to the case. It was more of a, as I understood it, is that you're a bottom-up approach, and that you have this education that shows through movements. You provide that MLK example, which is what how you would solve that. But I don't know how you would specifically resolve soft power, how you would resolve those impacts that the affirmative specifically has solved for. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not doing very good indicts or what the ultimate impact of security is at the end of the debate. Okay. Not saying that any of these things weren't at various points in the debate, but they weren't in the 2NR. Okay. Now, the fiat is not real argument. Yes. I just didn't really feel comfortable voting on this argument when you kind of state what it is, but you don't like explain what. You just say what it is. You don't really explain what it is or what it means. You say that you have this education argument, but at the end of the day, I really don't know what that education argument is. I mean, I guess I could do the work to put the alternative education argument to what education you actually produce in this round, but I just don't really feel comfortable going for that when there is debating on both sides on other parts of the debate. And at the point where when you say that we have this education, but you're not doing the link analysis or the impact analysis, I don't know if that education is actually there when you can't beat the actual when you can't actually win the substance of the argument, which is why I'm just not really comfortable voting on that argument. So in order for you to kind of win that, you would just have to say, for me, if fiat isn't real, these are things that we, this is just a debate, we're just going to move on, but what we actually learn in terms of how we orient ourselves, and then you could provide the Joe Schmo example, which is kind of funny, that's what we actually get out of this debate, and then do your link level and your impact level a little bit more in terms of that. Okay. And there were just remnants of it, but it was just kind of a little bit too scant for me to really warrant a negative ballot. So. Okay. That's what I have.
Just to recap, I should do a better link analysis, impact analysis, and then probably better spacing my case and K.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, these are just things that you learn through novice debate, so it's not really a big change.
All right. My vote is a little bit different than that. I agree with him in most of particular. I think that I vote negative largely not because of what you do, but because of what the affirmative undercovers. I think the affirmative is very weak in answering the K. I agree that your link and impact analysis is lacking to a large extent, but I have some link analysis, I have some impact analysis. I think the only real answer that I have on the critique from the negative is the permutation, which I don't have a real good explanation of. And while I agree that the fiat isn't real and your better pedagogy claim is really shoddily done, I need to have at least some analysis from you as to why you get to weigh the affirmative, or why your education is better than the negative education in order for me to vote affirmative. I think As well, the case debate becomes a wash. I have very little in the way of clear impact analysis. I do have you all extending some people will die impacts, but you don't ever give that into context of the critique, right? And you also don't give that in context of like how I'm supposed to weigh that in terms of like what is, you just don't give me impact analysis really sort of like impact calculus compared to the negative. And I need that in order to frame my ballot when you're saying like we outweigh, like okay, how do you outweigh? Why do you outweigh? You just say we outweigh, we have millions of deaths, okay? And a couple of things that I would say for y'all. First, I think that you made the decision to go for the wrong flow. The disad was, you were way ahead on the disad.
You were debating over it. Okay.
You should have, yeah, no, you should have,
That's good to know.
secondly, I think that the 2NC critique needs to be a lot more structured and organized. You become very sloppy very quickly.
Okay.
The 1NR is very good on the structure. I think that's sort of like the way that that she handles like uniqueness, link, impact analysis is very good. The way that you just sort of cluster everything together makes it a very huge mess. Finally, as a personal note to you, you should back off during her cross-ex. During the 1NC cross-ex, you are answering a lot of her questions, and there's in fact one point where I'm sorry, I don't know your name?
Carson.
Carson, there's one point where you ask him permission to answer a question in cross-ex. 1NC is your cross-ex. He should be asking you he should be asking you for permission, and if he starts answering questions without your permission, you should be making it clear that this is not acceptable, and it does not look good for it does not look good for mainly for you when you start talking over her like that, and especially when you're answering questions. Okay. For y'all, I would just say better answers, read more answers. I'm sure you have blocks to this. Read them.
If I could chime in, the problem was you caught on to what they were doing just a little bit late. So it's like you made some very smart arguments in 1AR. We're getting to like the aha moments in the 2AR. They just need to be a speech earlier in that, which is what comes through realizing what the argument is. I mean, this is a kind of a problem when there is titling problems of everybody naming these files a little bit different, so you really don't know where to go into your speech docs and trying to find this. So you just need to kind of realize earlier what they're trying to get towards, and then put that into your 2AC.
And as a rule of thumb, you should always try to have at least 4 or 5 answers to any particular flow, even if they're short analytical answers. Right? Your answers on the disad are an impact turn and a no-link claim that are both like one-sentence analytics. You should have more there. I think you read. I need to find it. I think you read one generic claim in the answer to the critique, and which is especially underwhelming because the preempt section of your 1AC is really responsive. The Ferguson cards and the demands from the state cards are really, really good, and you should be able to handle this critique without much difficulty just by reading 1AC evidence. And you don't do much in the way of that. You just extend the Ferguson card as sort of a half-hearted manner and move on. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
I agree a lot with what Rob had said. I think that why I end up voting negative in this debate is a lot of it has to come with 2AC undercoverage. Like the permutations of the 1AR says are new. They're not in the 2AC directly, which means I'm willing to give the 2NR a lot of leeway in regards to answering them. And same thing with like the press against the alternative. It's like it's not really there so much prior, and so that means that I'm giving them a lot of leeway. And when the critique alternative could solve for the affirmative, because if we eliminate the securitizing mindset, we wouldn't be imprisoning people, we wouldn't be incarcerating them, we wouldn't be utilizing these apparatuses. It becomes very easy for me to think that voting negative would solve for all the harms of the affirmative, but then also simultaneously be able to avoid the link to securitization, which gives it a slight net benefit. I think in the 2AR, the one argument that you go for that is consistent throughout the entirety of the debate is that since legalization is coming inevitably, the securitizing logic will happen regardless of the critique or not, and so that way it's important for us to have a different form of legalization mechanism that goes into effect opposed to what's coming in the status quo. And if that argument is cross-applied to the critique opposed to just sort of stated on the neoliberalism portion of the debate, I would have ended up voting affirmative because that would be reasons for why your discourse within this round would be a beneficial discourse. So I'm not voting because you don't get access to fiat, because I don't think that's explained well enough by the negative team. I'm voting essentially that the alternative solves your case, so then the net benefit of whatever the shoddily extended impact is, which I do agree with Peter that you need to have a better 2NR impact extension, is enough to get me to vote negative on the critique, but that it's inevitable where a better change in the system is the consistent argument from the 2AC to 1AR and then 2AR, and so utilizing that argument would be beneficial. I think in the 1AR, if you're going to make a lot of new arguments, which you do, you need to at least try and trick us to make us believe that they are not new arguments by pointing to things that your partner said and be like, she said this. That is essentially a permutation argument, which means, and then go into that, right? So that way there's a couple of line drawings, right? You tricked him into making him think they were in 2AC, and he's even saying, don't punish me for dropping them. And your argument in the 2NR should be, don't accept any of these permutations because they're all new, as opposed to doing what you end up doing, right? So you're lucky that you tricked him, but you didn't trick the judges. Yeah. But if you could trick us if you utilized your partner's words a little bit more, and I think that would give a better way for you to be able to solve the situation.
There was even a permutation made on the case flow, right? You can do that across the platform.
There was.
My partner just put it on the wrong page. It was really over here, and the fact that it's both neoliberalism is just obviously it was supposed to be on this flow, and they dropped it.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Any questions?
I have a question for Robert.
Yeah.
Robert, okay. So for deciding which one to pick, one of the reasons I actually went for security was we were really debating is because I really didn't know how to pick out security, and they made some offensive arguments for like globalization or like it made some where security is good, like security is, I think that was like their generic thing they said in the 2AC or yeah, it was like no, this thing is good, and so I didn't know how to. Like how would you propose kicking it?
So there are a couple of ways that you can do this. The simplest way with something like this is find a piece of defense that they made, find a defensive argument that they made,
okay,
and concede it. So for instance, they had a no solvency claim to the alternative, right?
Yeah.
So you just be like, the alternative is no solvency, the other one just as a generic that there's nothing that we...
defensive argument.
Right, or concede the permutation, right? The permutation is a test of competition. They've proven that the permutation allow this to go through, no solvency, but there's no reason that you should vote affirmative because we're winning the dissent. Here are the 16 different reasons why we're winning the dissent.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good debate.